for the audience while we are waiting for you to join us on this live show today. And before we roll the intro, I want you to drop a 1 in the comments if you've ever had a guest complain about a clunky checkout process, or 2, if high processing fees are quietly eating away at your margins. Let's see where this room is at. In the meantime, I'll see you after the intro. All right, we're back. This is Live with Sondra, and I'm your host, Sondra Shannon, CEO of Gatemaster Technology. And I'm coming to you live on a Monday morning. We're doing something a little bit different, but as some of you guys know, my travel schedule is changing up a bit, but I want to be here. And today I've got a really cool guest. But before we bring up today's guest, I want to first thank our sponsor, Gatemaster Technology. At Gatemaster, we focus on one of the most overlooked but most critical parts of the guest journey, and that is your payments. Because when payments fail, everything feels it. Your revenue, your reporting, your operations, and your guest experience. But when payments are designed correctly, they disappear and they become seamless in your business. They build trust and they protect your margins. And that's exactly what we're going to be unpacking today. Today's show is titled Stop Payment Disruptions, Secure Your Software and ROI. And I'm joined by Chris Wheeler, president of Paystri. Chris is a leading expert in payment processing and strategic M&A navigation with deep expertise in customer experience optimization, specifically in how frictionless transactions will drive business growth. He also specializes in dual pricing and surcharge strategies that help businesses protect their bottom line. And outside of payments, when he's not doing that, he's surfing, snowboarding, boating, fishing, and spending time with his family, which is something I love to hear and respect. And Chris, welcome to the show.
Greetings. Happy to be here.
Good. I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry about the noise. I don't know what's going on in the building. I keep hearing a banging. Can you hear it?
No, I think you're good.
All right, that's good.
Last time we saw each other in person, we were holding alligators together in Orlando, Florida. At one of the if you recall.
I remember that. What do you think about those alligators? They're surprisingly warm.
They're pretty cool. You can't say that I've ever held an alligator with anybody else, so it was a true honor, and thanks again for having me on the show.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, actually, holding those alligators was one of my favorite things I've ever done, and I think a lot of people don't know this. I have a bearded dragon.
Oh wow, cool.
Do you know what a bearded dragon is? Yeah. So she's
I do because I have an 11-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy who would love to have one. However, right now we're debating on what the next pet is for the Wheeler family. So.
I mean, they're not easy to care for, and mine is like 10 years old, and she's very, they're cold animals. So I expected the alligator to be a little bit more like the bearded dragon, but I always laugh when I tell people the story about when we held those alligators because they were surprisingly warm and cuddly. Like you want to cuddle with them, right? Like, and then you see I've seen videos where people have you seen the emotional support alligator?
No, I've not seen that
Yes, on the internet.
Tell me about it though. Is it good? Worthwhile?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, there's a guy who's got emotional support alligator, and I get it now. After holding, I can snuggle with one. I guess his loves him. He takes it everywhere.
My mind gravitates to another video where a Florida man with an alligator and takes it into the convenience store. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but that's a fine moment for a reptile as a sport animal, I suppose.
Well, are they reptiles?
I believe so.
I don't know. We're gonna have to. If anybody in the audience is listening, I don't know if an alligator is a reptile. I'd love to know because they're warm, right? So
You might be right.
I don't know. I don't know, but I do believe that that guy who has an emotional support alligator is from Florida. So there we go.
Yeah, well, of course. And I'm going to check.
I'm going
No
to Florida
offense.
tomorrow.
I live in South Carolina. We actually have alligators here, so
Oh,
once in a while.
yeah. We don't have them in Denver.
No, certainly not.
Well, hey, Chris, I'm really excited to talk about payments and architecture of payments,
Yeah,
software and M&A and all the things that you are a master of. And if you're okay, let's jump into some questions.
let's go.
All right. Well, so my first question is, and this is, I'm starting off strong with how can significant M&A activity within the payment industry lead to unexpected disruptions for a software platform stability? Now, I know you and I have had this conversation quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna let you start.
I mean, as you've experienced, you end up with fragmentation, right? Merged platforms, overlapping systems, sunsetting technologies, as I think you've experienced as well, shifting priorities, support teams get reorganized. I think most significantly, your relationships are potentially gone, right? Forced organic attrition of the people you're working with can manifest itself in slower onboarding, technology issues, lack of responsiveness when things break. I know that you've experienced that firsthand. And ultimately, the acquiring entity has to pay for the acquisition in returning shareholder value. So we often see broad price increases across the industry when this happens, and ultimately, this impacts your customers. Payments no longer is just infrastructure; it's directly tied to revenue and your customer experience, and it drives your retention. So if your payment landscape shifts, your customers suffer.
Well, I definitely hear that. I always say in at least in our world at Gatemaster that like one of, and this is any software company, where you have an integration that is a, it's always a possibility for a break point within what you're building and what you're offering your customers, which is why having strong partners who understand this are super important to us. But also, what I love about what you said is, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of disruption happening in our industry, especially with what's happening in M&A and these companies that are getting bought up or merged together. And for better or for worse,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there is some good that comes out of it. Companies like us sometimes are stuck dealing with whatever that fallout looks like.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, and I emphasize the relational aspect of that. And I knowing you well enough, I know that's incredibly important to you. And it's at the end of the day, one of the most critical, elements of all our most successful partnerships as well. And if those relationships are impacted or frankly removed, that I think there's no way it's not going to have a dramatic impact on your customers.
yeah, right? I mean, I always say, in fact, I was talking to a friend of mine over the weekend who's got a business in a different industry in Las Vegas. 'Cause I was in Las Vegas over the weekend. And, when you talk about customer relationships, it's like trust, right?
Yeah.
So much
Takes
trust.
takes a long time to establish trust with a partner. If there's not a pre-existing relationship already, and at the end of the day, that's what we're doing day in and day out. We're not selling payments; we're selling trust.
Yeah, we're selling trust. And trust with your customers too. That I would even say it goes that far. We're selling payments with our end user, which is our customer's customer, oftentimes, right?
The customer's customer, and I
Yeah,
think that's some people struggle to wrap their head around that. But at the end of the day, again, payments is no longer just infrastructure, right? It directly impacts the customer experience, and although it's in the grand scheme of software, a relatively narrow portion of the customer experience, nonetheless, is incredibly important, right?
yeah.
It's the intersection of customer experience and revenue.
It's a huge touch point.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some specific warning signs that a CEO in an organization or a CFO might look for to know that their payments or their payment partners are becoming a liability rather than an asset? And actually, I think I'd love to know the reverse of that too.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. You're going to hear a lot about my mention of strategy today and all of this. I think it'll be an overarching theme, but at the end of the day, I mean, if payments aren't helping you meet your strategic goals, and as part of that strategy, you should have a pretty clear idea of what your payment goals are and the underlying metrics that support those. And so, I think on the flip side of that, if to answer your question, if your payment partner isn't proactively bringing you the data that you need to understand how they're performing, like that's a red flag in its own right. Or they're just sidecar and not engaged. Going back to that relational element, some more new, or I guess more granular red flags would be low payment attachment rates, right? And I think it all comes back down to your payment strategy to begin with, right? Like, are you just promoting one or two, primary partners, or we see often enough strategy in which it's like a la carte, like bring your own processor. I would challenge that strategy to begin with. But nonetheless, if you have low payments attachment rate, or basically the adoption of payments within your product for a specific partner or processor, that's an issue. Low revenue growth, high attrition due to payments, low NPS scores. Again, I'm speaking payment specific. Low CSAT scores. I mean, heck, you can even go to Google and look at their Google reviews. Time to revenue, right? So basically time to process. Is it taking you too long to get customers live? Lack of transparency in financial reporting. Support. I mean, support is the lifeblood of our organization. And if your customers can't get real help when they need it, or your team can't because of technical issues, that's a major risk. So, in summary, your payment partner needs to be actively helping you grow. Payments should be driving adoption, retention, and revenue. And if they're literally just processing transactions, I think they're falling short.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like you've mentioned a few times the part about support. And I think that especially in the industry that I'm in, attractions, amusement attractions, the support aspect is a huge part of the trust that we need built. Because if you've never uh and I don't say this on the show very often, but uh talking about the past when I used to onboard all of the Gate Master clients early on in my career, before we had Zoom and all of the things, right? I had to go to a lot of the facilities, and oftentimes I'm working alongside the teams
Yeah.
back then. And if you've not seen what it's like to have, 1,000 people in line or at a gate and not be able to process transactions, it's a it's traumatic for these operators when it doesn't work. And I think we've come so far today, right? Like this was 20 years ago. We've come so far today in the tools that we have, and some of the things that you've provided for us and our customers, and what that looks like for the industry. But I remember those days, you know because I don't know if you remember the old like handshake that we used to have to do with credit card companies and drop credit card in a file. I don't know
Well,
if you were there back then when it was like we had a shared file on a server, and we would legitimately drop the credit card number. They would pick it up from that file, drop it back in, and there were so many ways it could break back then.
yeah, the days of dial-up injections, or and beyond. The industry has come a long way, and admittedly, I'm not a payments lifer. I come from a tech background. I 10 years at IBM, and was getting transferred back from Sydney, Australia in like 2012, back to the United States, and just found myself in not being as challenged at work. And so I started a software platform on the side as a passionate boater aimed to disrupt the marine industry. It's called Dock Hop. And, it's basically like an Airbnb for boaters to find available marina space if you're pulling into a harbor. And in not knowing at all what I was doing, right? But like I think that's the fun part of being an entrepreneur is like learning on the fly, and as you have to do to be successful. I learned a lot about integrated payments at the time, and so that was my first endeavor, I guess, going back to 2013. And of course, we integrated to Stripe, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the life cycle of a software developer. But payments has come a long way, but at the same time, technical issues still can and do occur, right? Where
Yeah.
you know payment terminals can go down, software can have issues. There's obviously a tremendous amount of risk for fraud and card testing and everything that goes alongside that can encumber your ability as a software platform to operate. And so there's a lot that goes into it, and I think that's why you need to be very selective in not only the technology but the team that you have behind you when you're integrated payments.
Yeah, I agree. Well, in your experience, what is the most common mistake that software companies make when integrating new payment gateways?
I think like the best software platforms think about payments as part of their product and their go-to-market and revenue model from day one. On the flip side of that, they treat it as a technical integration instead of a business strategy. And so, I was just mentioning this with regards to Stripe. We often see this early on in the software product's lifecycle. They're focused on APIs and documentation, like, hey, I just need to get this thing done. It needs to work. But they don't think about their goals surrounding onboarding, pricing, customer experience, support, or monetization, of course. And the reality is payments can drive a huge portion of software revenue. In some cases, 40% or more. And not to mention the multiples now on value at exit. So if you don't design it intentionally, you're just missing a massive opportunity. And I think payment strategy, like, for a software developer these days, falls into two buckets. Like you become your own payments company, right? You bring it in house, and you become a registered PayFac or your own ISO. And this is a huge expense and it's a huge endeavor. You build out a team with a technical and functional acumen to execute. You need to establish all the contracts and certifications required to perform that role. And frankly, it's a massive distraction from your core competency. And we have software partners today that went that route and ended up just coming back. And we can't do this anymore because we're not focused on our core competence of what we're really good at, right? And our company, Paystri, that's what we're really good at, right? And so on the flip side, you're relying on a third party, which needs to, I'm going to emphasize this, needs to stand in as a seamless extension of your product, right? Seamless extension of your product. And, if that's accomplished, you're promoting your brand and your customer experience. And so giving you a chief payments officer with, solid schedules, with regards to the cost to transact, embedding a team of experts within your product and providing you the strategic advisement to thrive in an otherwise like really complicated and opaque ecosystem that is payments.
Yeah. No, I mean, I say all the time, there are things at Game Master we build ourselves because it is, we're really deeply connected into the guest experience and what that looks like. But then there are things that you're right. I'm not an expert on credit card transactions, although, on how credit cards are handled. Although I'd say I'm pretty close. I say that, but then I've been doing it for so long. I remember the old days and how it used to be done. I could tell you how how much it's changed over the years and how these integrations have changed and all of the things that we've had to do to make things secure. In the old days, we didn't have to worry about the fraud that we have today,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't something we had to deal with. But, just to your point, it should be seamless and it should be something that is building brand loyalty for the parks and the attractions, at least from where we are. I know you work with a lot of different verticals, but
Mhm.
for us, building that trust. And so it does have to be seamless into the experience. The other thing too is like seamless across all of the purchasing outlets, I think is important too. If you got
Yeah.
Square over here or one one type of credit card processor in one part of your park and then in another, it's confusing for the guests. And that kind of makes me think about how you would define what a frictionless moment looks like in a payment transaction that actually builds loyalty.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to touch on something that you mentioned earlier with regards to maybe a fragmented payment strategy with multiple different processors in different areas and within an attraction park, for example. And I think that goes back to my original payment strategy. Like, what is your strategy, right? And
Yeah.
really understanding your why there and having a really solid reasoning for making those decisions. Because otherwise, if you have a very fragmented payment landscape, I don't know it's much of a strategy at all, at least from my
Yeah,
perspective.
I agree.
And so to answer your question about frictionless moment in the payment transaction, like I'm going to use the happiest place on earth is that the Disney slogan with the magic band, right? I love going to Disney. I get to go with my family. If we're lucky, every year, every other year, we hop in the car and drive down there for 3 days, and get out of there before our children are, stop failing to respond to their name due to stimulation overload. But you know, the magic band, I think, and maybe it's cliche for me to use this example. It's really like the moment in which, like, you know, payments are truly frictionless, right? You're not even thinking about it. You trust it; it works. It's a natural, extension of the experience. And if it's not something like a wearable, right, which is very unique, I think. Otherwise, it could be one-click checkout or just a really clean flow. That has a tokenized card that remembers who you are. That builds confidence, and confidence turns into repeat purchases. Like,
Yeah.
what's your thought? I would love to hear your perception of the Magic Band and how that's revolutionized things for Disney.
Well, yeah, I don't know if the world's ready for my thoughts on that, but
Yeah.
I'll jump in here. And I'm going to Disney World tomorrow, by the way.
Okay.
No kids, just me and a friend. I'm heading out to IAPA's headquarters Wednesday, and my
Yeah.
girlfriend who works for Disney wrote me and said, "Hey, come with me." So it's hard to say no because I
Right.
think they've got like the Garden Festival or something I've never seen before. So I'm excited to go to Epcot. But kind of going back to your question on the Magic Band, I don't know if you know this about Gatemaster, but we actually started doing transactions on bands in the
Mhm.
early 2000s, and it was through barcode because we don't, the way that we store stuff, there was we just had to access a code.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I should say this, but I'm gonna say this. We'll see who's really listening to this show.
Yeah, let's go.
My founder swears to this day that Disney came by our booth.
Yeah, took it, huh? Okay.
Granted, they've innovated on it. They've made it what it is today. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, and it's one of the hard parts of being here over 35 years. Patents expire. And
Mhm.
but you're setting trends. So, but yeah, we were doing payments on bands in water parks as early as 2001, and it was an amazing experience for them. One of the things that I think is interesting is what you said. It's convenient. It's easy. They didn't have to worry about it. We even went as far as to create limits, like spend limits for
Mhm.
kids. So if you had either a credit card or you had stored value on your band or whatever wearable or your season pass, I mean, for us, it could be any type of media that the park wants to use. But even having spend limits for kids, like they could only spend $10 in the candy shop, right? And those never really took off because it was a lot to manage. And we didn't have dashboards in the early 2000s that people could
Yeah,
access online. But I think today it certainly is ahead of its time. It's still something that we do. It's just now we do through our customer dashboards, and they can manage
right.
all of the payments. And then I think about my park tabs.
Yep.
Yeah, park tab was kind of a thought that I had one day. I think it was when we first introduced chips, and I'd spilt a whole cup of coffee in my purse. and destroyed my chips. It was in the early days. The chips on my card malfunctioned after that. And I thought, how is this going to work in a water park?
Right.
And I think it was you that helped us build that park tabs, right? Where we would do the pre-authorization.
Yeah, we even did a case study on it, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
And love your water park attractions, by the way. Definitely some of my favorite customers.
They're fun. They're fun. I mean, it's a fun industry.
I think it was David Sims, actually, who participated in that, if I recall.
Stephen.
Steve Sims,
Yeah,
yes.
Stephen. Actually, I talked to him over the weekend. He's
Awesome.
when you talk about and this is a funny story. When we talk about building trust and relationships, I think it took us 8 years to get that contract. 18
Yeah.
years we've known him now. He and Tiffany started together, but this industry is so much about those relationships and then that trust over time.
Yeah.
And so when you work with somebody for 8 years to get the job, right?
Yep.
You want to make sure that you can keep your promises.
Oh, yeah.
And this is why I'm always grateful for partners like you. So yeah, so I don't know if that answers your questions about Disney, but I always laugh about the MagicBand because that was something that we're big fans of. We've been doing for many, many years.
I'd be remiss if I didn't share with you. My wife calls me Disney Chris when I'm at Disney. So I think hopefully we go later this year. Of course, I don't get to go tomorrow. I wish I could.
Well, I'm a big fan of Disney myself. I am excited to go tomorrow, even if I only ride one ride. Sometimes I just like being in the environment. You just need a Disney day, right?
I love Epcot as well. So it sounds like you'll have
Yeah.
a great
And
time.
I got good friends, good friends that take me to places like that. So I'm super excited. But kind of going back to payments, I'm curious, what is the payment stage that is often overlooked as, it's an overlooked part of the guest journey. And I know that we talked about magic bands, we talked about making things easy and convenient, but what is another area that you see maybe overlooked?
Well, I mean, I think most businesses just still think of payments as a back office function. So they invest heavily in sales and marketing, customer experience, operations. But then if they treat the checkout as an afterthought, that's just introducing friction, right? Going back to like frictionless payments. Um, so payments is where the revenue is actually captured, right? And so
Yeah.
it's 100% of this necessity. And so if there's friction there, everything upstream loses value. Um, so yeah, at the end of the day, I think it deserves just as much attention as anything else as part of the customer journey.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we got a question, Chris.
All right, let's go.
We got a question from the audience from Rob. He says he would like us to explain what exactly we do specifically, and I'm not sure he's talking you or me, but maybe we should break it down. You want to start, or you want me to start?
Why don't you start from a
Okay.
software attraction standpoint, and then I'll come in with regards to what we do. How's that sound?
So for me, I like to make it pretty simple. We are a system that helps attractions with their buyer's journey, and that's everything from the relationship, the first touch, all the way into the park, food, beverage, retail, all of the revenue centers that the parks are operating from, and keeping that transaction seamless. This is why we need partners like Chris, because we want to make sure that our that we make buying super easy within the organizations that use Gatemaster. So everything from admissions, season pass processing, food, beverage, retail, mobile ordering, um, group sales, party booking, cabana rentals, tube rentals, you name it. If you need to take a payment, we got you. And Chris is helping us behind the scenes and under the hood with credit card processing. Is that a nice way to say it?
Yeah, at the end of the day, we effectively make the payments work, right? We're a purpose-built payment tech company, embedding payments into software, backed by an expert team supporting our software partners focus on co-growth. So, I like to think we offer more than just the payments, right, with regards to ensuring that the customer payment process is seamless and providing strategic guidance to our partners as it relates to payment features, technology, monetization of payment revenue, and other elements that are critical to a successful payment partnership.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I love about the partners that we choose to work with regards to payments, because like many of our attraction partners, I probably get 100 calls a day. Luckily, somebody else picks those up on credit card processing and merchant processing. And I'm sure many of the attractions are having that same experience. And so, like you said, you don't want to just piecemeal this. I think earlier in the conversation, you said something along the lines of bring your own processor. That doesn't always make sense because
Right.
they're not all made the same. You need processors who are aligned with you with regards to how that payment journey should look like. And that's something that I've always appreciated about you is, like with Park Tabs, right? How do we make that seamless and easy? How do we take away the friction of payments?
It brings to mind another partner of ours in a totally different vertical, field services cleaning. At the end of the day, they were struggling with the fragmented nature of delivering software features across multiple different platforms, and they just weren't getting the responsiveness they needed from X, Y, and Z, right? Or if there was a feature limitation in one payment gateway technology that existed in another, how do we deliver this to our customers with continuity, consistent timelines, and other things oriented around the experience, and so we helped solve for that. Responsiveness was a really big thing for them, and we've definitely lived up to their expectations as well.
Yeah. Well, I think like when you mention the fragmented nature of payments, and Rob, to answer your question, it's online, POS, back end, and anywhere where a payment is needed for a guest. And I think one of the things that you're mentioning when we talk about fragmented payments, I recently had a conversation with a potential partner of ours where that friction alone, we found about a $4 to $6 million loss. So I think that's something that a lot of businesses in general, regardless of industry, are not realizing that friction is costing them.
Out of curiosity, what was was that due to abandonment in shopping carts, or can you share a little bit more details as it
It was
relates?
it was actually due to they had one system that was selling, one system that was redeeming, and
Mhm.
then and then if you bought a ticket, let's say certain times of the week it was more expensive than other times of the week. So if you were
Mhm.
to buy a ticket, but it's all manual. So if
Right.
you were to buy a ticket on Monday and show up on Friday, they lost that money
Wow.
because they had no way to upgrade because their systems are not seamlessly integrated.
Yeah.
So when we looked at how many visitors were coming to this park, how much of that business was online and during those days. And so when you think about that strategy right there, like $4 to $6 million, I mean, we pay, it's like you said, when you look at strategy, not only are we paying for ourselves, but we're also recovering some of those losses that they're having.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah. So it was definitely an interesting find. But I think a lot of businesses are settling for those things and not realizing what it's actually costing them because they're not doing the math, right? And we're
Yeah. Opportunity costs.
yeah. So that's and anyways, I think that's going to make an easy deal for me because we're not asking them to even spend any money at that point,
Right. I
right?
mean, isn't that the best when you can offer so much value to a customer or partner that there's no real cost to adopting that service, and in this case, due to the savings that you're able to offer them, that's an incredible
Yeah.
victory there. And I love when you score those wins.
Yeah, me too. And you said this earlier, when you look at strategy for your payments, it is really about what is that measurable result that you can get. And I think that is what's missing so much, and why we appreciate partners like you who really look at that with us on
Mhm.
how we can strategize with attractions in looking at, what is that actual thing that we want to not only do. I mean, listen, at this point, every system should be able to sell a ticket,
Sure.
or they probably should be here, right? So
Mhm.
that's the number one thing. But um, but not all ticket sales are made the same. And like I said, in this case, it was costing them $4 to $6 million. So when we can go in and say, okay, we're going to recover that, this is a measurable result that this partnership is going to have. That's really what we're looking for.
And, to talk a little bit more about your software, and like payments are happening everywhere, right? You need these systems talking to each other, or you need one centralized system. And, payments can be out on, mobile devices for line busting purposes. They can obviously be online. They can be tethered to a countertop as you enter into the gate. Heck, they can even be triggered by an RFID chip in a wearable, right, as you walk in. So, payments are happening all around us these days. And again, getting back to the frictionless nature, it's when they happen without a customer even having to think about them. That's I would say the highest subjective as it relates to what we do.
Yeah. I mean, I had to buy tickets. And I'm not going to say who it is because I'm talking to them too. But my kids are all in theater, and I had to buy tickets for an event. And I remember being so frustrated with that buying experience. And
Yeah,
if I can't figure it out,
yeah.
it's bad, right? Like, those carts are getting abandoned. People are giving up, and they're not going to make it to the end of that transaction. And that's really what keeps me here today. And I'm sure you too, trying to help these businesses thrive
Yeah.
through better payment.
I mean, I love solving problems at the end of the day with payments and software. It's what, one of the things that makes me tick, and I feel it's one of my core competencies. So I have, and now that I've been working in payments for as many years as I have been, um, as a consumer, I demand the convenience of the technology that's out there, right? And I think we'll talk a little bit about Apple Pay or Google Pay or digital wallets here in a minute. But frankly, I've come to expect that as part of the checkout process.
Yeah. Well, kind of moving on then to that, because you brought it up, but I want to start with something like surcharges and dual pricing. You know,
Yeah,
how can attractions implement surcharging? Because I know that's a question I get asked often,
yeah,
or dual pricing without negatively impacting the guest's perceived value.
yeah. I think at the end of the day, first of all, there's a choice in most cases, right, by a business owner to adopt the strategy or not, and it's a pretty personal decision. I think in some cases, right, because at the end of the day, business owners, for the most part, um, their business is an extension of themselves. So it's a deeply personal decision, I think. And in some verticals it works better than the others. And for those that are watching that don't know what surcharge is, I know you've experienced it. It's where basically we're implementing the cost of the transaction in addition to the transaction itself. So at a gas station, when pay by cash is a bit cheaper, or otherwise you're paying a bit more to use a credit card. It really comes down to transparency and compliance, right? Like compliance is mandatory, and the card brands and rules and regulations surrounding it are fairly well established at this point, although they are changing. And there's some interesting things happening at the state level that you need to keep an eye on right now. But assuming that compliance, you can check those boxes, and your payment company should be assisting with that. If not, um, heavily involved in ensuring compliance or the technology platform you're using. But apart from that, it comes down to transparency, ensuring that there's clear disclosure up front, and also giving them other options to pay, right? So if you're surcharging online, for example, ACH is another great way to offer convenient payment at a cheaper price, right? So you're, as a business owner, you're offsetting your cost to transact in doing so. In-person transactions, card-present transactions, maybe obviously offering cash as another ability to to tender the transaction. We've seen a very wide adoption of surcharging across a lot of our software partners. And according to a stat I found this morning, 34% of U.S. businesses have adopted surcharge or dual pricing. From a business owner perspective, think about it this way. If you're running a 20% profit margin business, and surcharge or dual pricing might push another 2 to 3% right to your bottom line, like that's a 10% improvement on margins, and it's not insignificant, right?
Yeah.
As far as the question, your original question around the guest perception of value, it shouldn't feel like a hidden fee, right?
Yeah.
Like, back to transparency. If it's clearly communicated and framed as a standard pricing model, I think it becomes accepted. And when that's done right, it protects margins without damaging the experience.
Well, and I think so many customers understand today, and they didn't. And when I started in payments, I think so many customers today understand that that is a cost to the business, right? And
Yeah.
so it is in how you present it too, right? We work
Yeah.
with some nonprofits where maybe that surcharge or um, that surcharge is presented as a way for them to have a more sustainable option when they're selling online. And so I think, like you said, it's a personal decision. It's deeply embedded into however these operations work. But there are options, which is what I think is the biggest part of this conversation. Is it doesn't have to be done the way you're doing it right now. If there are other ways, and there are people like you and I who can help them with that.
Absolutely.
And I saw Rob asked a question: what the biggest disaster in our career was, and that is a loaded question. But I can truthfully say, and I think it goes with this conversation, not thinking big enough, right? Like
We're
that
going to
is probably the biggest disaster as an entrepreneur, I've ever set myself up for.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that with the book choice you had asked me about. 10x is easier than 2x. I think that's a great way to answer or address Rob's question. I'm excited to speak to that when we get there.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it. If you could apply one lesson from 10x is easier than 2x to the payment industry, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I think, let me just start at the conceptual level. A lot of people, right? Like when you're setting your strategy, going back to your point on big ideas or setting a big goal, it's like, let's double revenue, right? Like, let's get 2x results. And the problem there with that mindset is everybody just said, okay, well, I'm going to work twice as hard. I'll work 80 hours instead of 40, right? I'll be more focused, but you're still mired in doing too many of the wrong things currently that you're already doing, right? And you're just not aware of them, that aren't serving you or your organization, and otherwise is counterproductive. And so when you set an impossible goal, BHAG, 10x results, right? You need to stop doing the 80% of what you're doing today and radically change your approach under an impossible timeline. And then, then your floor is raised enough that there's very few pathways to actually get there. And hopefully that activity helps you see that. And, I'd highly recommend, if anybody watching today hasn't read any Dan Sullivan, Ben Hardy books, Gap in the Game, Who Not How, 10x is easier than 2x. Ben Hardy just released another book called Science of Scale that he co-authored with another individual. They're all brilliant. They all kind of address, some different entrepreneurial challenges. But if I had to pick my favorite out of the four that I mentioned, 10x is easier than 2x. There's just some amazing insights in there, some profound insights that you can gain from the books.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, and Rob, thank you for these questions because this actually, this show is so much more than just talking about payments. We want you guys to have like actionable things that you can take with you and things that maybe change mindsets and ideas and tell stories. But I love that idea of 10x is easier than 2x because first of all, it's going to take just as much energy
Yeah.
to go for 10x as 2x. So you might as well just go for the 10. And then two, I don't know about you, but I would much rather fall short on a 10x goal than a 2x goal because I'm
Well,
still
then,
way further ahead.
right. You might be at 5x, and is that a failure? Absolutely not.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Love
Well, one of my mentors always tells this story, and I love it because he had gone in to get a job, and he said, and he was in car dealerships, and he said, if I could sell 5 cars today, would you give me the job? And the owner of this car dealership said, yeah, we haven't sold a car in 2 weeks. Come on in here. If you can sell 5, I'll give you the job. Well, he ended up selling 2. Guess what? He still got the job because it was 2 more than they were doing,
right.
right? And that was still a win. And that's something that I think we as professionals, as business owners, entrepreneurs, um, and I wouldn't say like many of I've not ever had big failures with regards to the product that I have and the partnerships that I've had. I would say most of the biggest failures that I've had came from just not thinking big enough, right?
Yeah. I think another common theme that I see in all these books, and there's another book that's commonly cited. It's called, The One Thing. If you've ever read that book, and I can't remember the author's name, but the theme of the one thing is, present in so many of these books, and it's singular focus, right? And I think it's really interesting when you're focused on the one thing that, in our case, it's integrated payments. Like we, at this point, since when we first established our relationship, Sondra, over the past 6 or 7 years, have evolved into, we're purpose built to do this, and this is what we're doing, right? And we've shed some other areas of the business that just weren't serving us in that capacity. And we built a team around that. And we had to go out and bring in the right people, right? Because we didn't have, at the time, those people on our team necessary to execute at the levels that we wanted to be able to perform at. And it really comes down to what's our singular focus. And then, of course, having a really big, aggressive goal to support that.
Well, and then alignment.
Yep.
Right? Alignment. And on that note, I appreciate you for always being so aligned with us. I know we're up on time. I know we have so much more we can talk about. I
Yeah.
always tell people that if this happens, it means you got to come back.
Yeah.
But also, Chris, you're my friend, and we've had many long conversations, so I know that we could do a whole other show. But I do want to thank you for being here today and for
Pleasure.
this very important conversation. And I know that payments are one of the most critical, probably one of the most misunderstood parts of any business. And if you don't think it is because it's still a mystery to me, and I'm in this business all these years, and I'm sure there's some mysteries to it to you. But understanding how it does impact the revenue of our guests and the experience and operational stability, and there's so much that I want to change with regards to payments because it's often treated like a utility rather than a strategy. So I really appreciate you coming on here and kind of changing the hearts and minds of people that are listening today on this. But before I let you go, if somebody would like to get a hold of you, Chris, what's the best way they can do that?
Check out our website, Paystri, paystri.com, or you can find us on social media, and would love to help in any way we can. Thanks, Sondra.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
We appreciate you and Gatemaster, and hope we have an opportunity to see each other at a theme park near you soon.
Yeah, heck yeah. Disneyland, anytime you call me.
Let me know.
Bye, Chris.
Take care. Bye. You up.
So what today really reinforces is this. If your payment architecture isn't intentional, you're either introducing friction, or you might be leaking when it comes to margins. So again, just want to thank Chris for coming on today, sharing his expertise. I know we had to reschedule the show, and I'm always so grateful for people who are flexible and still show up for us, because you guys know I work in attractions. It's a busy time right now. This is like our season. This is our time to shine. So at GateMaster, we're working on getting quite a lot of our parks open and operating for the season. And my team, I always have to thank my team for showing up for these shows and doing all the work that they do. It takes a lot to put together a show like this. I was reflecting on that over the weekend. It's just, I feel very fortunate to have the people behind this and the partners behind what we do. So, speaking of partners and sponsorships, I do want to thank GateMaster Technology for continuing to push the industry forward and for creating integrated, stable, revenue-focused commerce systems. Again, I want to thank Chris, and thank you to everybody who joined us. Rob, another shout out for the questions. I love it. I love the participation. I love when you guys show up for us here and ask those questions. And thank you to everybody who's watching live. If you're listening on any of the podcast networks, thank you for being our audience. And if you are watching this on replay, hashtag replay, I would love to know that you are here and watching. This is Live with Sondra. And until next time, go out there and be great. Make payments better. And if there's any way I can ever help you, just reach out. I'll see you guys next time.